Yesterday, I was scrolling through a financial forum. I wasn't looking for dating advice, just, stock tips.
Right.
And yet, there it was. It was sort of disguised as an asset analysis. It was a comment from this 22-year-old guy, a college dropout.
Okay.
And he'd apparently just been given an $80,000 convertible sports car by his new girlfriend.
Wow.
A successful, driven woman, 15 years older than him.
15 years.
Yeah. And his profile picture, he was totally anonymous looking, but he described his early 20s as a kind of financial arbitrage.
Financial arbitrage. That's a specific choice of words.
It is. He said it was a time when he intentionally avoided traditional work and instead focused on his physique and social calibration.
So he was investing in himself, but not in a typical career path.
Exactly. Because he knew, he said, that a certain kind of high-value woman just beginning to panic as her timeline compressed would be willing to essentially pay for the youth and vitality he had.
Unbelievable. He actually said that.
He called himself a liquidity provider for a distressed asset.
That is just stunningly cold.
It was. But what was truly unsettling was how many other men in the comments, even older, more established guys, were agreeing with him.
They weren't judging him.
Not at all. They were analyzing his strategy. They weren't talking about romance. They were talking about SMV curves, biological depreciation, and this thing called the epiphany phase, where, and I quote, the female market bubble catastrophically pops.
So they're treating human connection like a stock market crash.
Completely. The whole perspective just shifted, from dating as a search for connection to this ruthless, time-based commodities market.
And that language, the finance and investment terms, it perfectly captures the core of what we're digging into today.
It really does.
We're investigating a very specific and I think very influential corner of the online manosphere. It's all centered around what they call the red pill philosophy,
which has systematically adopted this hyper-economic, almost scientific approach to human relationships.
It's an explicit attempt to take all the complexity, the nuance, the emotion, and just strip it all away.
And reduce it to systems of, quantifiable worth?
Exactly. Quantifiable worth, rationalized exchange, and crucially, time-based transactions. It's an ideological effort to turn sociology, biology, and finance into one unified, tactical rulebook for dating.
So our mission today is to really unpack this ideology. We need to dig into the key concepts they use, especially this sexual market value, or SMV. We'll examine the philosophical foundation they claim justifies this worldview, and then look at how this framework actually shapes behavior, especially in modern dating, on the apps that so many of us use every day.
Ultimately, we're really looking at the sociological impact of these manosphere narratives on, contemporary gender relations.
Right. How does this economic framing actually change how people date?
And how does it shape expectations and perpetuate these very specific and often very harsh gender stereotypes by just positioning everything as a ruthless marketplace?
Okay, so let's start at the source. Where did this philosophy even come from, and how did it establish the central metaphor of the market?
Well, the core philosophy really came together and got traction in some very specific online communities. The most prominent one was probably the subreddit RTRP, which stands for the red pill.
Right.
But the idea spread very quickly throughout what's called the manosphere.
That's like a whole ecosystem, isn't it?
It's a whole decentralized ecosystem, yeah. It includes older pickup artist forums, men's rights advocate groups, and just various self-improvement communities that are focused on male dating strategy.
And the name itself, the red pill, it's obviously a reference to the Matrix. What does taking this pill actually mean in their doctrine?
It's positioned as an enlightenment. You achieve enlightenment to what they call life's ugly truths.
So the idea is that most men are living in an illusion.
Exactly. A matrix of social norms that they argue have been artificially constructed, mainly by modern feminism, to serve female self-interest, not real equality.
You mentioned an illusion. What's the biggest lie they think they're exposing?
The central pervasive illusion, according to them, is the myth of female oppression. They claim that feminism, far from being about liberation, actually functions as a highly effective collective female sexual strategy.
And the purpose of this strategy is what, exactly?
The stated goal of this supposed collective strategy is to enable women to secure the most desirable mates possible while maximizing their access to resources and getting superior genes for their children.
How do they claim that happens?
They argue women use social and governmental structures to extract resources from men.
for example?
Things like alimony or child support.
Oh, wow.
They'll cite those as empirical evidence that the state is basically a mechanism for extracting resources from men and giving them to women.
So if feminism is the female sexual strategy, then the red pill is positioned as the necessary male antidote.
Precisely. They frame it as the counter strategy. It's men's sexual strategy against what they see as women's social strategy.
And they try to frame it as being very scientific.
Oh, very much so. They're keen to insist their framework is based on pragmatism and truth based on observation, a kind of quasi-positivist stance.
They're constantly testing their theories.
Yes, they claim to be in this continuous, almost scientific process of observation and testing to make sure their beliefs line up with the testable results we can replicate.
So they're weaponizing the appearance of rationality to kind of dismantle what they see as social idealism.
That's a great way to put it.
Let's go back to that jarring story from the beginning, because this is where all that economic jargon becomes so important to the strategy. We heard financial arbitrage, liquidity provider, shorting the bubble.
Yes, this is a critical point. When the 22-year-old in your anecdote calls his behavior financial arbitrage, he means he's exploiting a temporary structural inefficiency in this sexual market.
Right, arbitrage in finance is about exploiting price differences.
Exactly. Here, he sees the asset as his youth and vitality, and the inefficiency is the gap between the older woman's perceived market value and her rapidly diminishing time horizon. He thinks he's capitalizing on that time-based pressure.
And what about being a liquidity provider for a distressed asset? What's the asset and what's the distress?
The distressed asset is the older, successful woman.
Okay.
Despite her career and wealth within this framework, she's seen as being in a state of market panic because her biological value is depreciating.
So she needs liquidity.
She needs to spend her resources, the car, the money, her status, quickly, to acquire a commodity she lacks, which is youth and the ability to reproduce.
And the 22-year-old provides that youth. He's the liquidity provider in this cold transaction.
It's a brutal calculation, isn't it?
It is. And shorting the bubble.
Shorting the bubble means betting on the rapid decline of a woman's desirability after her early peak, which then forces her to overpay for attention or youth later in life.
They're literally betting against her future value.
Yes. And geo-arbitrage is just relocating to a place where your own SMV is disproportionately high to maximize your returns in the dating market. This whole vocabulary is designed to distance the user from human feeling.
And to give this a scientific grounding, they lean very heavily on concepts from evolutionary psychology, or EP.
They do. The whole red pill framework explicitly relies on EP axioms, which basically say that human behavior, including who we choose as a mate, evolved to maximize gene reproduction.
Which results in, they argue, fundamentally different strategies for men and women.
Strategies that they believe can't be overcome by social changes.
And this leads right to that infamous concept, Alpha-Fux-Beta-Bucks, AFB.
Yes. So EP literature sometimes suggests a dual mating strategy for women seeking one type of man for good genes and another for reliable resources. The red pill takes that complex, nuanced theory and just distills it into the stark principle of AFPB.
Let's break that down.
The alpha provides the good genes. He's identified by physical attractiveness, confidence, social dominance, risk-taking.
He provides the desired genetics.
Right. And the beta provides the long-term emotional and economic support. He's the dependable money dispenser, the steady provider.
So they see this as an inescapable biological division of roles.
And they present it as their own perceptive interpretation of academic EP literature.
And the sources claim the scientific basis legitimizes their whole strategy and justifies men ignoring their own emotional needs.
Well, what's fascinating is how selective they are. They ignore all the academic critique and the nuance within EP, and they just cherry-pick the parts that support a deterministic tactical rulebook.
By claiming it's scientific truth, they can position men as just being rational actors.
And it justifies suppressing any emotional yearning that might get in the way of optimizing their market strategy.
Which merges perfectly with this neoliberal economic frame.
Inescapably. Critics see this whole movement as a perfect example of neoliberalism extending market logic into our most intimate social domains.
Creating the sexual marketplace, the SMP.
A place governed by pure supply and demand, where women are the sellers of the core commodity sex and men are the buyers.
So if dating is a market, you need a quantifiable measure of worth. And that's where SMV comes in.
Exactly. SMV, sexual market value, is defined as an individual's quantified worth or desirability in this marketplace. And this application of economic metaphor, quantification, rationalization, accumulation, it's what strips relationships of quality and intimacy.
And replaces it with what? Exchange value?
Yes, with a priority on measurable exchange value and maximizing transactional efficiency. They see relationships not as connections, but as mutually optimized trades.
So the whole goal is to turn this messy, subjective thing, human attraction, into something you can chart and optimize, like a stock portfolio.
And this structure provides a language for men to discuss highly personal insecurities and failures in a seemingly objective, professional way. You're encouraged to stop thinking about romance and start thinking about your ROI, your return on investment.
The detachment is the whole point.
The detachment is crucial to the ideology.
Okay, so if we accept this premise of a marketplace, what are the actual commodities being exchanged? Who is the buyer and who is the seller?
If you analyze the pickup artist handbooks, there's a very clear and consistent market structure built around two primary commodities.
Let's unpack the male side first. What are men trading?
In this framework, men sell attention.
Attention. What does that mean?
It's broadly and strategically defined. It comprises three vital elements.
Yeah.
Time, money, and emotional investment. A man is marketing his willingness and ability to provide these resources.
Okay. And what is that attention buying?
Women pay with sex. And sex is defined as, various forms of physical and sexual interaction, from mild physical contact all the way to intercourse. The man is the consumer of sex. The woman is the consumer of attention.
So it's a supply and demand transaction, but what does that imply about the power dynamics?
It creates a very specific power imbalance. The man as buyer of sex is placed in the high power position.
Why?
Because the attention he sells is a limited resource that women are perceived to desire intensely. Conversely, the woman as seller of sex is in the lower power role because, according to their model, sex is the only high-value commodity she inherently possesses.
Which she has to use to pay the man for his attention.
Exactly.
That's a fascinating inversion of how we traditionally think about power dynamics in dating, where often the person granting sex is seen as having the power.
That's the key ideological shift. Here, the person granting attention has all the leverage.
And this brings us back to SMV. And this fundamental difference in how value is assessed based on gender. Let's start with how male value is calculated in this system.
Men are often conceptually referred to as the disposable sex in these materials.
That's a harsh term.
It's very harsh. It means men are not perceived to have inherent value just by existing. Their SMV has to be developed, earned, and cultivated over time. A man's value is fundamentally acquired.
So a newborn male starts at 0, and everything has to be built from there.
Precisely. The man as commodity value is derived almost entirely from acquired attributes.
Such as?
The materials list them explicitly. Social status, confidence, charisma, the ability to lead, power, professional or financial success. Physical attractiveness is a factor, sure, but it's secondary to these.
And the logic is that this all takes time and effort.
Right, and it's this accumulated high status that allows men to produce high-value attention, which they then effectively market, the man as marketer strategy, to women.
Now we have to contrast that with how female value is defined, because the rules are completely inverted.
They are. Women are framed as commodities that begin with inherent value.
And that inherent value is tied to what?
Almost exclusively to biological markers.
Yeah.
Youth, physical beauty, thinness, breast size, and the most critical, and I think brutal part of the theory, is that this inherent value automatically degrades over time.
They are literally viewed as depreciating assets from day one.
Yes. They're seen as stores of value, and her worth is principally derived from the sex she can produce, which naturally puts an intense time-based premium on youth and fertility markers.
And they claim that SMV for women is ultimately decided by men.
Yes, regardless of a woman's own attempts to redefine her own valuation.
So how do acquired traits like a high-level career, education, confidence, how do they factor into a woman's SMV within this framework?
This is a huge point of conflict in their narrative. They explicitly claim that acquired traits like status, professional success, or high confidence do not influence a woman's core SMV.
They might even detract from it.
Yes, they argue it may even actively detract from it. The perception is that assuming high-power roles, like a woman as an executive or a salesperson, actively lowers her commodity valuation in the sexual marketplace.
Why?
Because it signals competition or a lack of focus on what they see as traditional feminine roles.
That seems to tie back to the Alpha-Fux-Beta-Bucks idea. Does a woman's high status interfere with securing an alpha or a beta?
It's framed as interfering with both. A high-status woman is seen as potentially too dominant for an alpha and too intimidating or just unnecessary for a beta, since the beta's primary value is providing resources.
So the framework reinforces this low-power, high-value dichotomy for women.
A woman is valuable because of her compliance, youth, and beauty, not despite her lack of external status.
And I noticed the language of property is used a lot in the source material, too.
That's correct, and it is central to the commodification. The sources often refer to women as property belonging to a man, suggesting that men, and only men, have property rights over women.
So if a woman is an asset, she can be possessed.
And her values are controlled by the buyer, or the owner, which further justifies the whole transactional approach. This structural difference, acquired value versus inherent degrading value, is the entire engine that drives the time-based competition we heard about in the introduction.
And the most dramatic visualization of this difference is that famous, or infamous, graph-plotting sexual market value against age, the SSE curves. This visual is central to the whole narrative.
It is the ideological core. This visual model provides what they see as the hard data to justify their entire approach. It plots the desirability trajectories for men and women, and it demonstrates this stark, highly contrasting reliance on time.
Let's start with the female curve. What does that graph typically show for female SMV?
The female curve is depicted as a rapid, steep ascent, followed by an equally dramatic, sharp decline.
It peaks very early.
Exceptionally early, typically between 18 and 25 years old. This visual powerfully reinforces that concept of biological depreciation.
Her value is tied to youthful fertility markers.
And when she passes that very narrow peak, the market is described as unforgiving. Her value just plummets, often stabilizing at a much lower level where only a minority of men are still interested.
And the male curve is the complete structural opposite. It suggests men start low but accumulate value over time.
Exactly. Male SMV starts lower and rises gradually, peaking much later, typically late 20s to mid-30s. They often specifically cite age 36.
And it stays high for longer.
Critically, yes. The male curve is shown to remain high for a much longer period, sometimes plateauing well into his 50s. The underlying logic is that a man's SMV is based on accumulating status, resources, professional success, maturity, assets that require a lot of time to develop.
And this isn't just an abstract graph. It has profound mandatory economic ramifications in this worldview. It dictates strategy.
Absolutely. For men, the late peaking curve strategically frames them as an investment that matures over time.
So they're incentivized to focus on themselves in their early 20s.
Intensely. Self-maxing is the term. Focus on career, fitness, social skills. They're told to delay serious commitment until their SMV is maximized, allowing them to attract partners of a higher quality than they could when they were younger. They are long-term investors.
But for women, that early peak suggests the clock is running with extreme prejudice. It creates this immense time-based pressure.
It creates a tremendous sense of a compressed timeline. It transforms dating into a high-stakes, time-sensitive game.
So the philosophy urges them to lock down a proven commodity.
A high-status, reliable man, yes, before their inherent value depreciates significantly and permanently. And this acute pressure is the basis for the epiphany phase you heard about in the introduction.
Let's delve into that epiphany phase. What exactly is happening there, according to the sources?
The epiphany phase is the moment when a woman supposedly realizes her market value is irreversibly dropping, or has already dropped, while the standards she set during her peak years are still unattainably high.
And the narrative claims this realization causes immense panic.
The market bubble, in essence, bursts. This is the moment when the older, successful woman from your opening story, who might have overlooked the 22-year-old in her 20s, becomes willing to pay for his youth and good genes because her options have structurally narrowed.
The desperation of this phase is seen as the man's ultimate leverage.
And this entire model structurally justifies the 22-year-old's financial arbitrage exploiting the timing difference.
It makes his strategy seem brutally rational.
He's leveraging his high youth-based SMV at a time when older men are still building their status, and he's exchanging it with women who are willing to pay a premium to stop the clock, even for a moment. And the Red Pill community loves to cite selective real-world data points that they feel validate this logic.
What are those key data points?
They often point to studies or highly publicized examples of the richest, highest status men like, say, remarrying billionaires, consistently seeking partners who are significantly younger than themselves.
Right.
The data they cite suggests an average age gap of 22 years for men in this category. For them, this behavior, though extreme and not representative of the average person, is presented as empirical proof that the market logic of time-based value is accurate and universal.
So they're essentially taking outliers, the behavior of the 0.00001%, and using it to claim they've uncovered the fundamental, ruthless mechanism of the entire dating economy.
Precisely. It's an intellectual mechanism designed to support the belief that regardless of emotional complexity or social norms, sexual stratification will always align with this deterministic, time-based calculus of leverage and scarcity.
This model becomes a powerful, self-contained system for justifying emotional attachment.
Exactly.
Okay, so now we move from the abstract theory of SMV to the practical application. If this is the perceived structure of the market, what is the required toolkit for men? And that toolkit is universally called game.
Game is the entire strategic instruction set. It is defined as the learnable set of social and psychological skills men use to mimic alpha behavior and, critically, convince women they possess those desirable good genes.
So the idea is that these skills, if you practice them, make you indistinguishable from a natural.
That's the claim.
What are the primary elements of game?
It really revolves around two core pillars, demonstrating high value and maintaining absolute emotional control.
Demonstrating value would be things like social proof, status indicators.
Yes, showing that other people, especially other women, respect or desire you. But the emotional core is what they call a holding frame.
And what does holding frame mean in practice?
It means emotional stoicism, resilience. A man must never betray emotional vulnerability, distress, or excessive neediness. They argue this stoicism is a critical subconscious signal of genetic fitness. It communicates that the man is emotionally stable and capable of protecting a woman when threats emerge, therefore making him a desirable alpha. Any break in this stoicism, like showing jealousy or insecurity, is seen as disastrous for your SMV.
This framework also dictates a very specific and highly controversial response to rejection. I need to push on this. The sources describe shit tests and rapport breaks. What are they?
A shit test is any perceived challenge or protestation from a woman. It could be a direct rejection, a statement of boundaries like I don't date short guys, or just a general expression of displeasure.
And the philosophy frames these not as genuine communications.
No, they're framed as psychological tests designed to gauge the man's emotional resilience, his persistence, his confidence, to see if he can hold frame.
Wait, if a woman says no or expresses a clear boundary and the strategy is to ignore it because it's framed as a test, how do the sources justify that? That sounds like a direct tactical justification for overriding consent.
They justify it by framing these tests as necessary selective filters. They argue that successful men must ignore these protestations to communicate their superior resilience and genetic fitness.
So the narrative claims that a woman's stated preferences aren't her true subconscious desires.
Right. And this leads to the dangerous but structurally central concept of last-minute resistance, where the implication is that no can mean yes, and a man's sexual success hinges entirely on his faith in these principles, rather than respecting the clear emotional displays of his partner.
That reframes rejection from a conversation about interest to a psychological hurdle that has to be overcome with learned techniques.
It weaponizes psychological theories. The focus shifts entirely away from mutual respect and toward tactical persistence. The sidebar explicitly states that a man's confidence in these principles is more important than the woman's expressed feelings.
Which solidifies that Machiavellian mindset, where the end the acquisition of sex justifies the means. Let's shift to the modern environment that just amplifies all of this. Online dating. The rise of dating apps has fundamentally changed the landscape, and the red pill sees them as market accelerators.
They absolutely are seen that way. Online dating apps, especially the ones with a rapid visual swipe model, are viewed as exacerbating two major forces, hypergamy and lookism.
Because they prioritize physical appearance. You're reducing people to filterable profiles.
Exactly, based primarily on visual SMV markers. And the sources heavily emphasize the quantitative imbalance on these apps.
The sausage fest, as they call it.
Correct. There's a significant structural imbalance in the gender ratio, with men substantially outnumbering women. This imbalance gives women a vast, easily accessible array of choices,
which allows them to filter and select only the top guys.
Those perceived to be in the top few percentiles in terms of looks, job status, and social indicators.
So the sheer abundance of choice activates this specific economic phenomenon they call hypergamy inflation.
That's a perfect term for it. The availability heuristic kicks in. The vast, seemingly endless supply of potential matches on dating apps drives up expectations on the woman's side of the market.
Because men are forced to initiate and deal with rejection.
Structurally, yes. So women receive this overwhelming volume of interest. This allows them to become highly passive and hyper-selective, which drives up the perceived price of attention and dramatically inflates their standards.
And for you, the listener who uses these apps, this explains that feeling like standards are unattainable or that you're being ghosted after minimal interaction. The abundance creates disposable options.
Exactly. The systems structurally benefit a tiny minority of men, the alphas, the chads, who can handle the inflated expectations, while the majority of men struggle with volume and rejection.
Which is why the theory claims that men are not content being single.
So they persistently use these frustrating tools, whereas women, due to the high volume of attention they receive, have the power to be far more passive or just abandon the apps without fearing isolation.
But this also highlights that the definition of a top man is contextual. It depends on the platform structure.
That is a crucial distinction. The definition of the top man is fluid. The underwear model dominates a photo-based app like Tinder because the platform prioritizes instant visual SMV.
But his value might fade fast in a real-life social context.
Like a comedy club, or a party, or a professional environment. There, a talented comic, a charismatic BJ, or a successful executive who commands social attention might suddenly have significantly higher sexual value, even if they aren't the best looking.
So the design of the digital platform amplifies one type of SMV looks and status over others, seemingly validating these brutal theories, but only within that specific asymmetrical environment.
That is the core sociological observation we have to make. While sexual sociality is fundamentally not a market in the traditional sense, the combination of the metaphorical framing, the relentless quantification of value, and the structural design of these platforms makes the dating world feel intensely like one.
Especially for men who feel disenfranchised and are looking for some kind of algorithmic solution to their struggle.
Exactly.
We've spent a lot of time discussing the cold, calculated logic of this market. But if we dig into the human element, the sources admit there's a deep contradiction at the heart of this. The inherent human need for emotional safety and intimacy.
This is where the cost of the philosophy really emerges. The sources are surprisingly candid, acknowledging that men harbor a genuine fundamental desire for emotional safety and intimacy.
They actually say that men yearn to relax and be open and honest.
And find a safe haven where they can stop fighting and stop playing the game. Psychologically, this is a basic, innate human need for connection.
But the red pill philosophy insists that giving into this basic yearning is a catastrophic weakness that has to be purged.
It is framed as a toxic vulnerability. This desire is labeled a tenacious feminist illusion, a product of earliest feminized conditioning that men supposedly absorbed from a young age.
So they argue this desire for idealized unconditional love is what traps men into being exploited as beta bucks.
Right, and the core prescription is to deliberately suppress your own natural emotional wiring.
So men must mature beyond that want for idealized intimacy.
They have to suppress their natural altruistic inclinations and cultivate an ironclad emotional rigidity. This stoicism is presented as a necessary prerequisite for developing effective game and navigating the cruel reality of the sexual marketplace where emotions are seen as liabilities.
The irony is just profound. In pursuit of relationships, men are instructed to abandon the very qualities, vulnerability, trust, empathy, that make genuine connection possible.
It necessitates the deliberate adoption of a cynical, Machiavellian mindset. And this is justified by their interpretation of EP. They claim that because women are inherently utilitarian in mate selection, men are forced to adopt this stoicism as a necessary response.
They draw this harsh dichotomy, a man's unconditional love versus a woman's tactical, opportunistic love.
Yes, that's the framing.
So if a man can't reconcile his need for intimacy with the emotional walls this worldview demands, what is the psychological function of the commodification? Why insist on the market metaphor?
This is the crucial theoretical defense mechanism. The relentless construction of women as exchangeable, quantifiable commodities is theorized as a way to superficially resolve the internal conflict.
By objectifying women and framing them in terms of exchange value.
The intense erotic and emotional energy that should naturally attach to a partner is displaced onto a functional, objectified exchange.
So the market language is a shield. It strips intimacy from the relationship, which allows the man to avoid emotional vulnerability, fulfilling the rigidity the framework demands.
It provides intellectual permission to remain distant. It rationalizes self-protection through dehumanization. And that psychological move leads directly to the redefinition of the sexual act itself.
Shifting it away from connection and toward mere acquisition, this is the concept of instrumental sex.
Instrumental sex is the definition of sex treated only as a means to another non-intimate end, rather than being an experiential end in itself, which we would call experiential sex.
Let's break down what sex is a means to for each gender in this market structure.
For women, within this construct, sex is the means to acquire the highly desired commodity, male attention, his time, his money, his emotional investment. She is paying for his resources and commitment.
And for men?
For men, sex is a commodity to be acquired and accumulated. The primary goal is frequent sex with women who possess high SMV, making the acquisition of sex itself the explicit accumulated end.
The acquisition is the goal, but does the literature discuss the quality of the sexual experience at all?
Strikingly, the sources explicitly note that while sex is an end to be acquired, the literature contains zero discussion of how to make sex enjoyable or mutually satisfying.
Wow.
It underscores the purely transactional, instrumental nature of the exchange. It's not about achieving experiential sex mutual pleasure connection. It is solely about achieving a successful, verifiable transaction.
This entire framework, from the AFBB principle to the S&3 curves, serves as this comprehensive ideological structure designed not just to explain the world as they see it, but to rigorously justify a specific, non-emotional, and ultimately exploitative approach to all relationships.
It creates a powerful, self-justifying feedback loop.
The men who consult these materials receive this highly rationalized, market-based view of sexual sociality, and they're incentivized to act upon it. And this behavior, in turn, reinforces the perception that relationships are purely transactional.
So even though sexual sociality is fundamentally not an economic market,
the pervasive metaphor, combined with the structural design of these digital platforms, effectively makes it feel like one, particularly for those who are struggling within that asymmetrical environment.
The ultimate tension revealed in this deep dive is that profound conflict between the innate human need for connection, that desire for a safe haven we talked about, and the pervasive market logic that has reduced attraction to this time-based calculus of leverage and depreciation.
This digital economic framing provides a powerful intellectual defense for maintaining emotional distance and pursuing relationships only instrumentally.
And I think the chilling takeaway for you, the listener, is the idea that dating app design and cultural pressures can amplify human selective tendencies to such an extreme point that they seemingly validate a brutal deterministic theory of human mate selection, even when that theory is explicitly constructed to manipulate and commodify. The environment itself becomes part of the self-fulfilling prophecy, making the marketplace feel real by enabling the most selective and transactional behaviors possible.